Chapter 13. Malini. It was presented to her as the unified vision of all her council. They would seek to starve Sakata out. Sieging the fort would be well and good if we had proper defense against their greatest weapon, Malini said. Have we gained one that I am unaware of, my lords? Whatever weapons the High Prince may possess, Mahesh said formally, his people cannot survive starvation. In time, they will surrender to our great might. I see. Malini allowed her skepticism to seep into her voice. Have our supplies altered? Our rice stocks, our fuel, our water? A twitch of his jaw was her response. He knew what point she was making. For all their superior numbers, a siege was lost by the side that starved first. Malini was an empress only by prophecy and her own proclamation. Everything she had was negotiated, borrowed, or bartered from her allies. Everything those allies gave her, they gave in order to see Chandra removed from the throne. And they were growing restless. The Empress is correct, an official piped up, much to the obvious ire of a handful of Mahesh's favored lords, who turned and glared at him. We do not have the supplies for an extended siege. That is somewhat a problem, Khalil murmured. Will Dwarali send some supplies to remedy it? This was asked by a low prince of Sakata, his expressions sullen. Seated among Malini's court, Razia's eyes narrowed. Lord Dalal Khalil has offered what it can, Khalil said, but I cannot speak for the Sultan. Then you offer nothing of consequence. Lord Narayan laid a placating hand on the low prince's arm. Their water supply, another lord offered. If it's cut off, the city holds deep reservoirs, Narayan said immediately. This was not new information to Malini nor for any of the men present, and all of the more reason why a planned siege was not remotely feasible. Nonetheless, the lord said mulishly, it is an option. There was a rustle from Malini's left as Lata rose to her feet. The men fell silent as she lifted her chin and spoke, her voice clear and calm. I must speak against this plan, Lata said without wavering, despite all the eyes upon her. As a sage, I seek knowledge. I have learned about the history of our empire, and I can assure you, my lords, that the maze fort of Sakata has never been successfully sieged. It is famously impenetrable. Armies break upon its walls. In the Age of Flowers, it even kept the Yaksa at bay, shielding the High Prince and his kin. To siege the fort is to choose failure and the death of many, many men. Empress, Mahesh said firmly, ignoring Lata. It is a gamble. None of us deny it. She grimly marked how he was already aligning himself with the other highborn and not with her. More proof that he would need to be dealt with. The High Prince, Mahesh went on, his fortress. I do not dispute that he possesses weapons that we do not. She marked again how he paused over the word weapons, with something akin to reverence. We cannot simply leave him here at our backs. He will follow us on our journey to face your brother, and we will be crushed between two forces, Parijats and Saketas. Whatever can be done to weaken or starve the High Prince's forces, the better. Our own difficulties may be significant, our supplies limited, but the High Prince is hemmed in. We are not. They will tire long before we do, and then we will have them. This path, Empress, and this path alone may bring us success. I am a seasoned general. You have placed your faith in me. Do not let it falter now. I beg you. He bowed deeply, every inch the loyal soldier. It sounded compelling when he spoke in such a way, all fealty, but it was not the whole truth. They are not worried only about sieging Sakata, she thought. They want to put Aditya in my place. They're buying time. She knew it. It was, after all, not the first time men had tried. Every skirmish lost, every time the war bit like a dog at their heels, there were highborn who sought Aditya out. A male scion of the Divyanshi should rule us, not a daughter, they said to one another when they believed she could not hear. The fools never countenancing that she had eyes among the cupbearers, their maids, the boys who polished their armor. Aditya is the eldest, the true heir. Malini's time was running short, and damn him, Mahesh was stealing what little she had left. She made sure not to let her expression change. She knew him. He was devoted to the mothers of flame. He could yet be swayed, if he could be led to believe in her again. If she could capture the moment when she'd first proclaimed herself empress a year ago on the road to Dwarwali, if she could preserve the worshipful light that had filled his eyes and spear it through his heart, she could keep control of him. "Then let us wait," she said, "and see what can be done to remind Saketa that for all their weapons, they are our prisoners." Malini went to Aditya's tent. She brought Swati with her, carrying a tray of food. "Brother," she greeted him as Swati placed the food down and swiftly departed. "I missed our normal meeting. Apologies." "None are needed," he said. "Rao told me what has been happening. If you had simply looked outside your tent, you would have known without his assistance." She did not say it. She sat, tucking her legs beneath her, smoothed her sari down. He gave her a calm look in return. "We need to talk," she said bluntly. "Mahesh wants to place you upon the throne. Has he approached you?" "He tried to invite me to the war council," said Aditya, "but beyond that, no." He traced the edges of the plate, touched his fingertips to the edge of the roti, feeling its heat. "There are lords who have approached me before," he said, "but not him. His first loyalty has always been to you." Aditya shook his head. "He's a man of faith, not Chandra's brand of faith in the mothers, but his belief is no less firm, said not with cunning, but with the steady assured understanding a priest had of religious conviction, the way it would mold a human mind and a human heart. And the fire has shaken his faith, blessed magical fire." "The fire was not from the mothers," Malini said, exasperated. At least with Aditya, she didn't have to hide that much. "It sounds very much like the blessed fire from the Book of Mothers," he said mildly. "To one such as Mahesh, a sign from the mothers will always be a greater power, greater significance than a sign from the nameless God." She bit down on her tongue, a light grounding pain. What was the use arguing with him? He was not saying he believed it, only that Mahesh did. When she was calmer, she spoke again. "And if he asks you to take your place, to lead the army, to become emperor—" "Ah, Malini," he said softly, "you once begged me to do the same. If I could refuse you, do you think anyone else could sway me?" She nodded tightly, the both of them staring at each other, tense and wary. The curtain parted. Malini had half risen to her feet when Rao entered. He was holding a bottle of wine. He paused when he saw Malini there. Rao offered her a tentative smile. He wasn't still angry with her then. That was nice to know. "I didn't know you would be here," Rao said apologetically. "The guards didn't tell you?" "Only a moment ago at the door," he said, "so I don't have an extra cup for you, Malini. I'm sorry." "I'll drink from the bottle then," she said easily. Rao nodded. "Eat your food," Rao said to Aditya. "You're too thin." "You sound like an auntie," Aditya said, but there was a hint of a smile at his mouth and he finally began to eat. "It's good after all that you're here too, Malini," Rao said. "It's easier to speak to you directly with only trustworthy company, to speak to both of you." He poured the wine, one glass for himself and one for Aditya. Malini took the bottle. She had thought once that she would never drink again, that her slow poisoning via tainted wine during her imprisonment would sour her on it forever. But she discovered a curious pleasure in enjoying something that had once been a cause for pain. The wine was a proper Saketan vintage, rich and smooth, warming her belly. Rao looked between them. "Malini, I don't want to talk politics," Malini said swiftly. Rao's expression was only faintly frustrated. "You'll rarely have the opportunity to do so with me, with your brother, without watchers," he pointed out. "You're going to tell me I have Alor's support," she said. "I know that. You'll tell me Shrunga chafes at the costs of war, the supplies they send us, the unglamorous drudgery of it. But they'll still stand by me because the Nameless and the Mothers have both chosen me, and I'm better than Chandra. And you're going to tell me that I need to do something about Mahesh." She took another sip of wine. Heedy. "I've been told as much before. Find me a Parijati lord who can take his place, and I'll gladly remove him." "I was going to talk about a lot of things, wasn't I?" Rao said mildly. "I'm not wrong," Malini told him. "You would have said it all eventually, but I don't wish for that. Right now I would simply like a moment of peace." "I am not sure this is as peaceful as you hoped," Aditya murmured. "No, but it was a peaceful place for Rao, and mothers knew she needed Rao to remain strong. Right now he looked fragile, as if the war had leached something from him. For all the strength of his body, the new sun-darkened deep brown of his face, his arms leanly muscled beneath their bracelets of chakrams, he was reduced, pared down by the ceaseless drumbeat of battle. "We've spoken what we need to," she said to Aditya. "Then we should drink and do something to pass the time," Rao said. "We could play a game of 5 stones if you like." Malini laughed. She couldn't help it. The children's game. She and Lalaurie and Narina had played it time and again as girls, throwing colored stones in batches of 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s, up in the air and catching them with the same hand. Malini had always been awful at it. "I even have painted pebbles for it," he confided. "Fine," she said, holding out her hand. From the corner of her eye she saw Aditya smile too, shaking his head. She lost, of course, soundly, but at the end of it she felt a little more relaxed, a little more herself, a little more human. The bodies were, by tradition, kept distant from the main camp. Bodies were polluting, a source of sickness and stench, but there were always priests attending to the corpses, preparing them for the pyre, blessing them with prayers and ointment and garlands of funerary flowers. In the very first weeks of battle, when Malini and her followers had begun to face Chandra's forces on the great mountainous crags of Duarali, her followers had brought priests from their own city-states and lands, but those men had not remained for long. Priests of the mothers held great respect for the dead, but death in war was hard and ugly. She did not blame them entirely for departing. The priests maintaining the funerary tents now were not trained in Parijat. They were the keepers of small Sakatan villages, shrines, and humble temples to the mothers. In Sakata there was a minor sect that worshipped the mothers as one being, the Faceless Mother, who they claimed was all women who had burned as one, joined in a single great consciousness. Small and looked down upon by Parijat's central priesthood, the sect were not afraid of hard work and had quickly become the bulk of the priesthood serving her army. She had approached the tent, flanked by Lata and Swati. Malini could see 2 men near the entrance. They were thin, tired-looking, ash-marked roughly at the forehead and chin, their knot-worked hair bound back from their faces as they shared a carafe of water between them. When they saw Malini approaching, one leapt to his feet and slipped back into the tent. The other waited. "Empress." The priest bowed low to the ground, then straightened. He did not have the tranquil, gentle gaze the priests of the mothers had all possessed in Harshingar. His mouth was puckered, his eyes surrounded by shadows. This close, she could see that the ash of his forehead and chin had faded with sweat. "The man who saved me was a priest," she said. "I wish to see his body." The priest did not argue, though he apologized profusely as he guided her into the tent. "There is little we can do about the smell," he said, voice trembling. "In this heat, Empress, you would do well to carry a attar of roses with you to mask it." In the normal course of things, the man's body would have been burned immediately after the battle that had killed him. But Malini had quietly arranged for orders to be sent to the funerary tents and to the unlucky soldiers who guarded them, that this particular body should remain untouched until she had the opportunity to see it herself. "When I next visit here, I will do so," she said, although she could not imagine why she ever need to do so again. Still, he nodded, mollified. The body lay under a white sheet. Flowers had wilted at its feet. He warned her again that it would be unpleasant before he drew the cover back. It was. Swati made a small, miserable, retching noise and rapidly backed out of the tent. Lata averted her eyes, but remained. Malini stepped forward. He was young, deep brown skin, closed eyes, no ash on his forehead any longer, but he had the braided hair of a priest of the mothers, and the air of tranquility even in death. Bracing herself, she rolled up his sleeve. There was a tattoo on his arm, a long one that stretched as low as the knobs of his wrist. It must have hurt to be marked so close to the bone, with the bare needle and soot and tannin to darken the scarred lines. The words were in old Sakitan script, but Malini could pick up snatches of meanings here and there. Mothers, flame, void. "No priests remain here for long," said Malini. "This is thankless work." "There is nothing thankless about tending to the sacred rites of the dead," the priest said swiftly. Then he blinked, graying as he remembered himself. My apologies, Empress." "No need. Where is your temple?" "Empress?" "Your temple," Malini repeated patiently. "You accompanied Lord Narayan here, but there is no temple on his lands. I am asking where you trained and worshipped before you came to lay Saketa's dead to rest in my camp." "On the land held by Prince Kunal," the prince, staring at her with the alarmed look of prey under the paws of a beast. "There is a temple adjoining his mahal. The priests are Parijat trained." "I am sure that's true, but that's not your temple," Malini said. "No, Empress, no." He swallowed. "I was trained in a small shrine, one that served the farmers primarily and many merchants who passed through." "You were well treated there? Educated?" He nodded. "Show me your wrists," Malini ordered softly. He wore a long shawl, loosely coiled over his arms and shoulders. He shoved the fabric back to bare his arms and held his wrists before him. They were shaking. "You are tattooed as he is," she observed. "I was sheltered in the heart of the faith, in Parijat, but I know that the priests of the Faceless Mother carry the names of the mothers in their flesh, so that worshippers may be free to pray to one figure alone." She raised her gaze expectant. "My temple," he said, stiff with terror, "where I was reared, it worshipped the Faceless Mother, yes, Empress. As did this man, I see. This man who should not have been anywhere near the battlefield, let alone poised to save my life. He should not have died for me, but he did, and I believe you know why." "Empress," the priest choked out. "Tell me what you know," she said, gentle in her restlessness. "He was sent," the priest said. "Surely he was sent." "By who?" "The temple's high priest," the man whispered. "Perhaps. I was told nothing of this, Empress, I promise it." He sounded truthful enough. That did not mean she believed him, but she nodded as if she did, gazed into his eyes over the corpse of a fallen priest. "Tell me more about your high priest," said Malini. "About the temple where you were trained. I want to know everything, and in return I will forgive you for the secrets you have kept from me, however unwittingly.